Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Government Transformation Show, the podcast for public sector changemakers. I'm Tim Coulthard, Community Director here at Government Transformation Magazine, and my guest today is Emma Charles, who is Director of Public Sector Delivery at Kin Carta. We're going to be exploring sustainability in UK public sector. How much of a priority is it right now on the agenda? What initiatives are happening to improve carbon footprint, deliver sustainable solutions and services for end users, and generally build that into the DNA of how government operates and thinks? Clearly, there's a lot to be done. It's a huge challenge for everybody in government and outside of government. So Emma's going to share some practical ideas on how better decisions can be made, how digital and technology can support the environmental and sustainability agenda, and what's next on the horizon in terms of how government can come together to pursue these big challenges around sustainability. Really important topic and lots to cover. So let's jump into that conversation right now. So Emma, welcome to the Government Transformation Show. Thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you. I'm very pleased to be here.
Great stuff. And looking forward to jumping into a conversation around sustainability, current areas of progress, not so much progress, opportunities, challenges, and run the rule over how UK government and public sector agencies can address, maybe improve in that area as well. Because I know it's an area that Kin Carta have done a lot of work in. So keen to find out what that looks like. But let's start at the beginning by sort of doing a bit more of an intro to you and your background. So tell us a bit about your career to date and your current role with Kin Carta, and I suppose how you're working with government now to help them.
Cool. Okay, so I am Kin Carta's Director of Public Sector Delivery, which means that my role is to make sure that we are doing really great work within KNC and within a public sector environment, and also that works in reverse as well, so that KNC people are like happy in their roles within that kind of very interesting, sometimes challenging civil service world. The reason why I have this role in particular is because I myself am an ex-civil servant. I was a civil servant for 15 years, which every time I say that, it makes me feel really old because I've done lots of things as well as that. But I worked for the Home Office and the Valuation Office Agency, and I was a fairly senior digital leader in all of those areas. But I would say that when I was a civil servant, I had no idea about sustainability in any kind of way. So when I left the civil service, I went and worked for a digital agency which was pretty hot on sort of people and helping people upskill, which I found interesting. But the kind of environmental side of things was something that had eluded me a little bit. So I then went and worked for a fantastic company called GemServe, who have a net zero arm, and that really sparked my interest in everything environmental. I did a lot of research and reading about it there, and wrote some thought leadership pieces while I was at GemServe. And then the opportunity to work at Kin Carta came up. So I've been with KNC for almost a year now. We work on a number of different public sector projects. So we have worked with the Home Office. We work also with Department of Levelling Up. We have a lot of work that we're doing with Planning Inspectorate, and we do bits and pieces with the Ministry of Justice. And also, I'm very proud to say, we're also the sponsors of the Civil Service Environment Network. But I'm sure you want me to stop talking and move on. So
No.
maybe we can come back to CSEN.
I would love to, because I think it's really interesting some of the work they're doing. So let's definitely stick a pin in that and come back to that. Cool. And you obviously joined us at the Government Transformation Summit, and Kin Carta hosted the discussion table around sustainability. And I'm not being glib when I say, why does sustainability matter? I mean, it goes without saying to some degree, but particularly the sweet spot for Kin Carta, I'm interested in kind of how you're working in that area and what some of the issues are that you're kind of playing through with government.
Yeah, cool. So the reason why sustainability is particularly important to us is that we are an accredited B Corp. There are not that many companies have B Corp status, and we submitted ourselves for accreditation under the B Corp system about 3 years ago. And what that does, it means that everything that you do is audited from a people, planet, and profit perspective. So every decision that we make as a company needs to be made balancing those three things. So obviously we have to be profitable, but also we consider people within that as well, and the impact on our people and an impact of our projects on wider people in the world as well. And then planet is a very significant element of that as well. So we can't make a decision which will have a negative impact on the planet. And we also have a lot of quite stretching targets for ourselves around planet issues. And actually, sustainability, in one kind of interpretation, is actually the balance of those things, people and planet, and how that plays out. But in this kind of context, what we're really focusing on, because in some ways, I mean, it's not that people is not important, but I think that the planet area of it is far less understood in many ways. So we have a big, heroic, audacious goal in Kin Carta that we want to save our clients 1 million tons of CO2 emissions. And we think there is a huge opportunity in the civil service, particularly in the UK, but maybe even wider. Big opportunity because on the one hand, the civil service in the UK government is responsible for the big targets that we have around climate change and doing things on a big international scale. But there's also an interesting sort of other side to it, where very few people within the civil service actually know that much about what any of this actually means in any way. And I would count myself into that. Probably about this time last year, I had no idea either. And that's the reason why we're involved with things like the Civil Service Environment Network and that table at the summit as well. Because obviously we want to kind of get our name out there. Profit is important to us. You can't have a company that is successful without having a profit. So we do want to get our name out there, but we also want to have this really positive influence on the world around us, really. And that's why we get involved in these things. And to be honest, personally, it's why I work at Kin Carta and not another consultancy, because of that kind of focus that we have.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we flip the focus around, and you touched on it briefly around kind of current levels of government focus / understanding around sustainability issues, I'm curious what your view is from the conversations you've had, the projects you've worked on, as you said, your own experience directly working in civil service. What are your main takes on the way government organisations are currently addressing sustainability issues, both in terms of the extent of it, the focus of it, doing a good job, not doing a good job? What's your sense of that?
Well, I've talked to lots of different departments and different teams and departments about this over the last 6 months or so. And this is something which is really organically grown out of me doing 1 or 2 talks, maybe 3 talks, about climate change and how you can measure your impact on the environment. And and just as a result of doing those talks, a lot of people have contacted me proactively, which is great, but also a bit sad at the same time, because there's just not really the knowledge source out there, and people are like, oh, this person knows a little bit about this, and I wouldn't say I'm an expert in any kind of way, but I maybe can help a little bit. And so what I find myself able to do is, because lots of people have come to talk to me, I found out more about them and their challenges and what worries them and what they know and all the kind of things that they're working on. And I like to compare myself to a bee, because it's a little bit sort of like very friendly, eco-friendly sort of analogy, but like kind of picking up these bits of information, just going around and cross-pollinating between different departments, which is a lovely situation to be in. But I shouldn't be ending up as someone who's like as almost critical as that.
Yeah.
In this whole thing. So what I'm finding is that how are different government organizations addressing sustainability? So you've got some teams, like the ones I've been talking to, who are focusing in on different activities that they can do tactically to help their teams learn more. Maybe they know a little bit and they're doing some bits and pieces like that. So you've got people like the Met Office, who I spoke to a couple of weeks ago, who've kind of come up with a checklist of things that you can opt into doing, and they've got some kind of impact levels that you can measure against each one of them, and you can sort of somehow clock up and work out what you can be doing and what your positive impact is.
Right.
And I just thought that was really kind of tangible way of doing it. Then you've got these bigger sort of more set piece teams, like your sustainability teams within departments as well. And they're really focusing in on cross-government targets, like the net zero targets. And they've made really quite good progress in many places. A lot of them have kind of established what they're trying to get towards, and they put things in place in order to get there, and they're measuring against it. But it is still quite a new area, and we've actually ended up over the last few weeks helping DWP, who have a really excellent sustainability team, but still hard for them to kind of arrange their thoughts into how do you actually meet these things that you're setting yourselves, especially when the world around you is changing so fast. How do you actually have a roadmap when the nature of that road isn't necessarily
the
going to be the
terrain you're
same?
navigating through is
exactly that. So we've just been doing some work with them, helping them to arrange their thoughts, and hopefully we'll be doing more with them as well. So they've got people devoted to doing this thing, but it's not easy. You then got some like cross-government groups forming around this. So I think some sustainability leaders, cross-government groups, starting to think about meeting up. They've had a few meetings. I think that really needs to kind of massively increase, because like I say, it's this information sharing thing. They need to be able to support each other. But it's starting to happen. That's good. And I've also know that the chief technology officers and chief digital officers are starting to come together very much with the help of the chief digital and data office. And they're talking about the right kind of things. So that's all really great progress. But I just always come back to the fact that beyond all of this, there is this knowledge vacuum. There's so much goodwill out there. Like I talked to all these people contacting me, but also quite a lot of anxiety, because people feel like they should be doing something. They don't actually know what they should be doing or whether they should be doing it. If they want to try and embark on doing it, they don't really know how to prioritize it against other things that they're doing as well. And that's really the area in which CSCN is trying to get into, like giving them a little bit more help and guidance. So yeah, I think it's changing at an organization kind of level. The maturity is increasing, still not quite there, but that individual empowerment isn't there. And that's certainly a big theme that came out when we were talking at the summit table as well, across the whole day.
Converting that goodwill and sentiment into action, I suppose, is a big challenge. And I suppose that leads us to this, to maybe starting to look at some of the kind of practical action points that organizations could be taking around this, whether it's digitally enabled, technology enabled, or whether it's that kind of cultural change and that empowerment piece, I suppose, so that they can deliver better services and operational redesign and whatever it might be. And I suppose also when we talk about sustainability outcomes, that could be socially sustainable. It could be a service that's more usable, that people will stick with for longer. And it could be that kind of green environmental impact. There are multiple layers to it, I suppose. So what's your sense of how they can start to make improvements around this, once, assuming the goodwill's there and that they're sort of empowered to start making some of these decisions and changes?
I think digitalization is always a big and good place to start. So the more you get your services online and the less paper and energy you use in the kind of transaction of your services, the better. But I think that's kind of embedded as an idea quite well within civil service now. It's even you've even got quite high profile people saying that digitalization is the way forward, even when you wouldn't expect them to. So that's all good. But there's other bits and pieces which need attention as well. So digital and technology is a big area to look at. And what it needs to be far more is bringing better, more thorough understanding of your kind of energy impact into decision making. And actually then being able to use that knowledge to choose sustainable options and practices. And the kind of thing that I mean by that is proper green cloud hosting. Like lots of government services are currently on the cloud, which is great. It's better than on-premise. You make quite a big saving. But actually, what is that cloud hosting provider doing in terms of its energy efficiency? Because actually data centers are quite a major contributor to the world's energy usage and therefore emissions as well. So how are they cooling their operation? What kind of energy are they using? How efficient are they? We should be really asking these kind of questions and using that to actually make decisions. We do quite a lot of help with a number of private sector organizations and kind of really asking those sorts of questions. And then when you're actually in the cloud, how can you make what you're doing, even if you've got a energy efficient provider, how can you make how you're running your services more efficient? Like, can you turn things off at certain times of the day when there's low demand? Those kind of things, just that fine tuning. We've had quite a lot of success with that. Things like your coding practices. Are you just like using massive images and putting loads of things down the line, which use up more data from those data centers and things like that? And even things like device choices, like if you're giving out loads of laptops, like some of these major departments are huge. So the energy consumption of all the laptops that you're using, if you could just maybe test them out before you use them in some sort of way and choose a more environmentally friendly one, you're going to make quite a big impact on your Scope 3 emissions in the end. Another way to kind of think about improving performance and capability. So I think using some of the really good stuff that is there already would be really good. So for example, there's the fantastic government service standard, which I have interacted with in a deep way over the last 10 years, many times. I love it. It's the reason why I do the job that I do now, I guess. But it's there, and it really, we talk about kind of social things. The service standard is really good at considering things like inclusivity and accessibility and inclusive design. But nowhere in it does it talk about sustainability. Nowhere is it saying, have you coded your service in a way which is actually efficient? And have you measured it and made sure it is the smallest size that it can be? And have you made your APIs so that they don't suck a whole load of data for no particular reason? That kind of thing. And there's a new kind of top priority list of services which the government is now focusing on, and it's going to be doing reviews of them. And can those reviews include reviews of sustainability as well? So all of these kind of really good places to intervene and make a difference. And they exist already. So let's just use them. That would be good. And then using techniques and things that we've got already further, but maybe in a slightly different way. So one of the things that we've been talking to DWP about is slightly easier said than done because it's a little bit novel to get this to actually happen. But actually doing user studies of attitudes and knowledge and ability to impact climate, carbon usage within departments would be really good. So you could do a user study of maybe a segment of your audience to find out how much they know about this kind of thing and what kind of ways and nudges and levers can you use in order to help them to understand sufficiently to get right kind of decision making into the things that they're doing every day. So just kind of understanding your audience better from that kind of perspective is a really good way. And then you can really educate them and upskill them and turn them into like mini advocates. And I think that would be really powerful as well.
I suppose now you say it, it makes total sense. There isn't going to be this magic green spell that's going to make everything better. It's going to be sensible decision making, incremental gains, keeping this issue front of mind when you're in procurement process, when you're making decisions on operational processes, and all of these small things. If you know, and when you're talking about, you know, DWP with tens and tens of thousands of people, each with a laptop, if you can save, if you can make it 10% more energy efficient, then that's a big saving. So it's not going to be that one thing that looms over the horizon and saves us all. It's going to be making better decisions and prioritizing in slightly different ways as we go forward. And I know I think there's now stipulation around, you know, in the government procurement process that about contracts above a certain size, bidders have to show their, you know, net zero policies and that kind of stuff. So there are some structural things that can be brought into play as well, I guess.
Well, there are, and I think I think it's good that you have to have a net zero policy. But who looks at that? And who says whether it's any good or not, and who's even helping suppliers to actually write their net zero policies to make them worthwhile? That was something that we did talk about at our table at the summit. Actually, is there is a lot of trust in suppliers to be able to actually work that out, and it's actually probably a little bit harder than everyone thinks, and there's no one from the commercial side actually looking at that and making sure that it's okay either. So I think people should be pushed harder, but at the same time given more support in how to actually meet those targets, because they're there for a reason. It's a really good thing to get your suppliers to actually be working in a sustainable way, but it needs to actually work properly.
It shouldn't be this adversarial culture. It should be supportive and mutually beneficial. So yeah, that's an interesting one, and interesting that played through in those conversations. Thinking about practical steps, getting started. I mean, you've outlined a bunch of very real, tangible decisions, opportunities there. In terms of when you're seeing some of this stuff play out, I guess you maybe see some of the same issues and challenges plus opportunities coming over the horizon. Put you on the spot a bit here. Do you have sort of a few tips that you would share in terms of what's going to work in this area, how you're actually going to win battle for hearts and minds, or make these implementations more effective, that based on what you've seen recurring?
I've got a few, but I will start by going back to this thing about actually understanding people properly, as sort of groups of individuals, and actually what matters to them and what are the kind of things that you can give them in order to give them the knowledge in order to make better decisions. I think that's utterly vital, and we should approach it as if we were building a massive digital service where you would do a whole load of research into your users to work out how to give them the best service possible. It needs to be the same kind of thing. We need to understand it properly and not just assume that everyone is the same. It matters too much to do that. So that's one thing. Beyond that, I think getting the basics right is a really important thing. So you've got different scopes. I'm not going to go into them because I quite often get it wrong when I try and explain it as well. But scope 1, scope 2, and 3, properly understanding them, working out how they are being measured. And this is probably something more at an organizational level. But I think it's also quite important for everyone in the organization to understand that these things exist. So scope 3 is the most variable one of those things. And the decisions that we're talking about that people are making all pretty much sit within that scope 3 area. So just understanding them is a really important thing. Thinking about those net zero targets, having those roadmaps that can flex based on the environmental context, and having those targets in place is a really, really good first step, and it needs to be there, and not everyone has that. So that's probably step 1, apart from understanding your users. Then whilst you and I are talking a lot about individual people and the decisions that they can make, there is a real need for leadership around this, because it really needs to influence things like that education. How much are you going to actually tell people about these things? How much are you going to intervene into those things? How much are you going to incentivize things? So you could, for example, give people a carbon budget in the same way that you give them a financial budget, and then encourage them to look at things like value for carbon in the same way that they consider value for money as well. But if you're going to do that, there needs to be like quite a conscious decision that you're going to do it that way, and the leadership needs to be shifted upwards in order to do that.
Yeah.
Buy-in from permanent secretaries is quite important.
Yeah, that's tough.
Well.
If your principal measure, and you know it is going to be value for money and value for taxpayers' money, the tension is already built in, right? You can't then just go, oh, I've made another decision. It costs more, but the carbon footprint's better. If you don't have that mandate, you're sort of caught between the two stools.
You have to be allowed to make the right decision, because otherwise it will always come down to the cheapest option, and it's not very often that the cheapest or quickest option is the most sustainable one. And you also quite often get, when I'm talking about people, profit and planet, you get quite a lot of tension between people options and planet options as well. So being able to actually work out how to make that trade-off is quite an important one. Because even things like Zoom calls and having your camera on, actually, whilst it makes it a slightly more personable experience and more pleasurable, it's a lot more data intensive. So how do you kind of balance those things off? It's not the case that one is needed more than the other. You need both. So yeah, value for carbon, really important thing, I think. And then if you got things like, if you put the parameters in place and tell people what they've got to work within, that's where you start to get innovation coming in and more creative thinking. But only if this kind of thing is seen to be okay, that you can actually kind of play around within that in order to meet your targets, but they do need to be there in the first place. And then measuring as much as possible is a really good thing. And there will be no standard way to measure. So this is a kind of really crazy thing, but you kind of literally got to think about what is the work that you're doing, and then what is the best way in order to work out what the carbon impact of that is, and then measure it over time and see if you can bring it down. And we've got a carbon calculator, for example, that we use to measure the footprint of our projects. And just by doing that, you can then start to see this kind of day by day, person by person impact of one project compared to another. And some will be higher footprint than others because they're different in nature. But are there anything within those parameters that you can actually flex and change in order to bring your carbon tally down? We've done that before. We managed to actually reduce the project's carbon footprint by about 15% because we were managing it in that kind of way. But yeah, measuring and then proactively looking at what you're generating is a really, really critical thing to do, because otherwise you don't actually know whether you're making any difference. And it's really motivational if you actually want to make a difference. Actually seeing that difference happening is a really great thing to see.
Which then supports that people aspect of sort of motivation and buy-in and support as well. You see, they're all in, these things are all linked at the end of the day, aren't they? And so just you mentioned a couple of sort of points that came out of your conversations at the Transformation Summit. And so I'm just curious, reflecting on that, on some of those interesting insights that came out. Was there anything that kind of surprised you? Were there areas that really confirmed things that you probably had maybe recognized already from previous conversations? Anything new, or anything really kind of nailed down things that you've experienced before?
It was really good. There were a number of really, really good conversations. Every single time we had a conversation, it was fascinating, actually. So confirmation, I think, very much of this massive feeling of people feeling lost and that knowledge gap. Every time we had a table, it was like, oh, don't really know what to do about this. What can we do? Even my co-hosts, but sometimes at a loss as to what they should be doing in that kind of area. So yeah, that was kind of a bit of sad in a way, but also good to know that there is a thing that needs to be done and to understand that. One thing I don't think that I had properly understood before was this need for the leadership element of it. I think I had focused a lot before on the individual empowerment, but this big thing that people pointed out, the fact that, yeah, I want to do these things, but I'm being told to do this thing and this thing and this thing as well. And when I have to add that all up, this is probably going to get deprioritized because they are my priorities. So this leadership there, this kind of prioritization mandate,
Empowerment,
empowerment through that leadership, I think is really important thing that I hadn't quite clocked up until that point. And then this real need for toolboxes and toolkits and things, and just practical things that people can actually do. And there are some around, and we just need to share them more, I think.
Yeah.
And hopefully we can do some stuff to do that with Civil Service Environment Network and through kind of the conversations we're having as well. But yeah, I think it's going to be a long road, which will change, but people do want to kind of follow it, and they just need to have the equipment in order to do it.
Yeah.
And the direction and leadership in order to get them there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's given us a sort of a really good snapshot of where we're at now, I think, and also some practical things that can be done in terms of those individual decisions. Those kind of key points around empowerment come through really strongly of you know, if you've got competing interests, you're going to defer to the one that is top of your list and priorities, and that and what you've been sort of mandated to do. And so I guess you'd like that the decision making needs to trickle down from the top, like you say, so that people feel like this is a priority and I am empowered to make decisions around this and prioritize. And it's not always about cost, it can be about that footprint as well. So it's pretty clear some of the things that need to happen, and like you say, organizations like CSEN can help to sort of spread the word. Hopefully in a year's time it won't just be you that's the bee buzzing around sharing the insights. But it's interesting you say that. The fact that you made yourself visible and people came to you would suggest that there is this untapped need for information, support, whatever you want to call it. You know, there are all these different factors at play.
Definitely.
So Emma, thanks very much indeed for sharing that. It's been very interesting to hear some of those practical steps as well. So I hope people listening will sort of think on how maybe they could start to implement some of those, as well as sort of pushing for that wider organizational mandate as well. Easier said than done, I'm sure, but in those individual decisions, I think there is scope to make progress, which is encouraging. So it just remains for me to say thanks for joining us for the episode, sharing your insights and sharing those practical ideas.
Well, thank you. It's been a really enjoyable experience, and thank you very much.
Our pleasure. So there we have it. Thank you again to Emma for joining me for the exploration of sustainability in UK civil service and the public sector. Clearly a lot to be done, but there are some positive signals coming out of government agencies. And as Emma said, there are a lot of practical steps that can be taken already around better decision making, around implementing digital solutions that are less environmentally impactful, and also bringing the procurement process into line, making better decisions around suppliers and partnerships as well. Clearly a lot of work to be done, but good to see some progress being made and hear how organizations can already start to make improvements. That's about it for now, but we'll be back soon with another conversation with a public sector change maker. Until then, goodbye.